let's talk about the previous game before we look ahead to Tennessee. Mizzou on the road, they lose in overtime, 41-34 at Boston College. I mean, was this game what you expected? What was your take? We know the Mizzou defense certainly, again, there's a lot left to be desired there on the defensive side of the ball. What surprised you about this game?
Yeah, I think it was sort of as expected, although I did think Mizzou was going to win the game. I knew it would be close. I think I expected Mizzou's defense to play a little bit better just because they had been talking about how they kind of figured stuff out. But clearly they haven't figured the rush defense out at all, giving up, I believe it was 275 yards on the ground, which is just inexcusable. And when you're watching that game as a fan, I'm sure you're just scratching your head. What is going on? So that was definitely disappointing to see because the Mizzou offense played really well. I think this season so far they're averaging 7 yards per play, which is really good for Mizzou's offense. Connor Bazelak threw it to 10 different guys, so he's getting a lot of different guys involved. Tyler Beatty had 2 touchdowns. And then, especially that last drive with, I believe it was, 25 seconds left for Connor Bazelak to lead that drive down the field. And then for Harrison Mevis to kick a 56-yard field goal to tie the game at the end of regulation to send it to overtime. So it's another, thing for Mizzou where they were down by 10 in the fourth quarter. They came back, they tied the game, they did everything right. But then in overtime, just, one play for Mizzou on offense, Connor Bazelak makes a mistake. He owned up to it the other day when we talked to him, and, he said he just didn't read the defense quite correctly there, and that was on him. Although he said there might have been a late hit there, so I might have to check the tape on that one. But, Bazelak made a couple mistakes. He had those 2 interceptions, but overall the offense played really well. The red zone offense is tops in the nation. They're perfect at the red zone. They've only had 1 field goal. The rest have all been touchdowns. So a lot to like out of that. But the defense is, we're talking about it's just a broken record. Every single week we're talking about how are they going to be able to fix it. And they're going to have a tough test on Saturday against Tennessee.
We're talking with Andrew Kauffman, brought to you by International Tap House, iTap. Okay, and I want to talk some offense as well, but let's start with the defense, which you already touched on it. But what are the guys saying? Steve Wilkes, Eli Drinkwitz, as you mentioned, 275 yards rushing allowed on the ground. It kind of reminds me, I hate to say it, of the really bad Rams years during kind of the Spags era. And to me, that's just an indication if you're getting dominated and another team feels like they can run the ball at will against you, I mean, it makes you look like a bad football team. And I know Mizzou's pretty good offensively, but what are the guys saying, the coaches saying about how to correct this as quickly as possible as they get ready for Tennessee?
Well, they still got, the excuse, I want to call it, that, it's a new scheme, new defensive coordinator, but now we're 4 games in, and so I get that still, and I know it's a complicated scheme with Steve Wilkes, but at what point is that no longer an excuse that these guys need to be able to figure it out, or, Mizzou needs to, less complicate the scheme? But, Coach Wilkes said you're going to reteach it. They're not panicking. Coach Drinkwitz, when asked about it, took full blame, which I thought, that was a good move as a head coach, taking full blame and making sure everyone knows it's not just a defensive problem. He pointed out the interceptions. He pointed out a couple special teams penalties that they had. So it's not just a defensive problem. But I think we kind of all know it really is, it comes down to the rushing defense. And, there's only so much Coach Drink can say that, we know what's going on. But Coach Drink also said he might change up some of the offense. He's got to, think more as a head coach as opposed to an offensive coordinator. So perhaps, on offense, he's trying to, establish longer drives. Obviously, you got to score points, but perhaps if you establish a longer drive, the defense isn't on the field, as much because you're on offense so long. And with Tennessee this week, it's interesting because Tennessee, they're either 3 and out or they score a touchdown. So perhaps that philosophy could work pretty well this week. It was interesting, though, that Drinkwitz did point that out, that perhaps on offense, with those longer drives, he can end up helping the defense.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to make because as I'm watching that game, now a lot of folks will obviously focus on the second interception that ended the game in overtime, but I thought that interception to start the third quarter, when I'm watching it, I just thought to myself, I think now Mizzou is going to lose this game. Now, clearly, I didn't know that Mevis was going to tie it late with a 56-yard field goal, but I thought that because there's a lot of pressure on an offense, even though Mizzou is pretty dang good offensively. But if you feel like you need to score points and most likely a touchdown on almost every drive, if you have an empty drive, it really puts you in a hole. And that's why when Bazelak threw that first pick in the third quarter, I'm thinking, can Mizzou even come back from this? So I do think that's where the defensive issues kind of then leak over to the offense. And you got to think there's a lot more pressure now on the offense to score basically 40 points to try to win a game.
Yeah, it's really no margin for error. And I say that there's always, in college football, you hear that a lot from coaches, no margin for error. And there usually is a little bit, but in this case, it really feels like that, doesn't it? That they have to be perfect. They have to continue when they get in the red zone. They got to punch it in. And they got a kicker in Harrison Mevis, that they're very fortunate to have, because this guy has not missed in college, and nor does it even seem like he's even come close to missing. So, that offense is great, but at what point will it become too much? The one thing is, though, he had the interception. He also had that bad interception against Kentucky, and they still were able to come back and have a chance to win. They could be 4-0. They're only a couple plays away from being 4-0, which is, crazy to think with how this rushing defense has been. But, I think that is a point that needs to be made, that it's not like they're getting blown out in these games, that they're giving up all these rush yards. Now, when they go up against some tougher competition like Florida and Georgia, that's where it's really going to be zero margin for error. But Tennessee, I think they can have a little bit, but, they got to play pretty well, and I think they know that.
We're talking with Andrew Kauffman, sports director at KMIZ-TV in Columbia, brought to you by International Tap House. You brought up a very interesting point because, and I don't have the greatest memory, but as you said, Mizzou, they've lost 2 games by 1 score this year. Now, last season, weren't they on the better side of 2 of those games? There were 2 games that they won close and late by a score each time. So it is one of those things that over the course of a couple seasons, it kind of evens itself out, where you're in a lot of close games, and last year you won a couple of those, and early on in this season you've lost them both.
Yeah, there was a ton of one-score games last year, and it really did seem like Drinkwitz came out on top. And I remember, he answered those questions when why are you so successful in these games? And, I think he was even, at that time like, hey, this is football. Sometimes they go your way, sometimes they don't. But they hit that game winner against Arkansas. I think a lot of fans remember that. That was Harrison Mevis. They were in that close game against LSU, the defensive stand at the end, which was sort of similar to this Boston College game in a way, where Coach Drinkwitz didn't use any of those timeouts there at the end. He wanted the defense to win the game, but I think the defense was a little bit stronger last year. I say that, and that game was 45-41, so it's not like the Mizzou defense was great in that LSU game last year, but they did make the stand when they needed to. In this case at Boston College, of course, Boston College scored with like 25, 30 seconds left, and Mizzou somehow able to drive down the field. But these one-score games, it's college football. I think Mizzou is very close in talent to a lot of these teams that they're playing, as opposed to, when they play the Florida and they play to Georgia, that's going to be different. But the Tennessee and Mizzou I think Mizzou does actually have a better roster than Tennessee right now. So this should be a win for them. It should be. But, we'll see on Saturday.
And here we are, a third of the way through now the regular season. Mizzou's 2-2. You're there covering every game. You're at every practice, watching the team, listening to them. So, we focus a lot on Connor Bazelak and Tyler Beatty, and defensively Martez Manuel and Blaze Aldridge. So a third of the way through the season, give me a guy we're not talking about that you think has played really well, and maybe somebody else that a third of the way through you feel like needs to step his game up.
Well, we'll start with, some people we'd like to see step their game up, and I'll talk about a St. Louis guy. I think everyone would like to see more out of Mookie Cooper, and I'll say even Dominic Lovett too. I think fans would like to see more out of these guys. Mookie's clearly still dealing with an injury from fall camp. Coach Drinkwitz talked about it at his press conference earlier this week and said that, he feels like he's kind of held him back with trying to get him out there. But Mookie only played 6 plays against Boston College. So the injury report will come out later today. He wasn't in full pads when I was we're only allowed 1 practice per week. When I was at practice on Tuesday, he wasn't in full pads, but that's not to say that he'll play this week. We'll find out with the injury report later. But Dominic Lovett, showed a lot of promise in fall camp. Only had 2 catches for 14 yards against Boston College. So I think he's got a ton of potential. And I don't want to put too much pressure on the guy because he's only a freshman. And I think he's going to have a great Mizzou career. But I think fans would like to see definitely some more out of him. And I'll give a shout-out to Michael Cox real quick, the walk-on running back. I've been really impressed with him. He came in and scored a touchdown against Boston College, that 1-yard score, and he was untouched. He's this big walk-on guy. He went to a really small school, so he didn't get a lot of recruiting opportunities, and now he's walked on to Mizzou, and he's this big dude. He had that long rushing touchdown against SEMO the other week, and he also had a big spring game. I think I mentioned that a couple weeks ago on this radio interview. So I like to see some more out of Michael Cox. So I'll give that guy a shout out because he's all business, and it's nice to see walk-ons making plays on Saturdays.
And we know since entering the SEC, Arkansas has become Mizzou's rival, especially in football. But I'm thinking with Tennessee, even go football, basketball. Obviously, Konzo Martin was there, didn't love the way that ended there. And then in football, you have Josh Heupel. But it also doesn't seem like there's a lot of controversy. Sometimes with a rivalry, you'd like some nice quotes and maybe guys getting after it a little bit. And it seems like that's not the case. What are guys saying this week? I've heard Heupel's been very complimentary of his time at Mizzou. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think there was a Tennessee running back, that was, I think Tyon Evans, their starting running back, was asked about the Mizzou defense, and he kind of made a sly comment about, we're going to have some fun. So if you're looking for some bulletin board material, that might be where you'll find it. I saw that quote on Twitter the other day. So there's a little bit, could be something there. But, Josh Heupel definitely was complimentary. Eli Drinkwitz, I asked him if he's ever met Heupel. He said he hadn't met him before, but it's definitely complimentary of him as well. They have, definitely it's more interest with Josh Heupel coming back. I'll definitely say that. I'm interested to see his offense. I'm shooting the game. I'm filming the game on Saturday, and I remember when he was at Mizzou, I had to be on top of my game every single time Mizzou was on offense because he does a play every 10 seconds. So you really got to be ready to record every clip. So I got to get in shape. I got to, do my stretches before the game to make sure I'm ready to go for it. But, it should be a fun game on Saturday. And I hope the weather stays clear. I'm a little nervous. I'm talking to our chief meteorologist every day, just making sure it's going to be okay. But right now it looks like there's going to be some rain. So we'll see how that, affects the game. But definitely Tennessee and Mizzou, it's, I think Mizzou's got a 5-4 edge on Tennessee all time, but Tennessee's won the last two matchups. So this is definitely a game. They're both 2-2. They have, kind of similar schedules. They both played an ACC team. They both played a MAC school. They both played an FCF school, and then they both played an SEC game. So they're both 2-2. It should be a great matchup, and if Mizzou can stop the run, I think they got a great chance.
Brought to you by International Tap House, iTap. We're talking it over with Andrew Kauffman, sports director at KMIZ-TV in Columbia. When you mentioned the Tennessee players saying we're going to have some fun against the Mizzou defense, it made me think of the quote, which I didn't think was a big deal last week, of course, when Eli Drinkwitz, and I think if you listened to it or watched it in context, he basically just said, look, if we're going to have a non-conference opponent, I would like for it to be a regional rivalry. And then I'm paraphrasing, but said something along the lines of, we don't really get a lot of recruits from the great state of Massachusetts. And I didn't think that was very controversial at all. Clearly, Boston College used that. Look, it's not like they weren't trying to win the game before that, but I kind of had some fun and thought it was interesting how Boston College really took that quote and ran with it. And I'm wondering, did Eli talk about that this week and the fact that maybe, hell, I won't say anything anymore because people are just going to take everything out of context?
Well, I definitely got the sense from Drinkwitz he played things a little bit more safe at his news conference this week. But he still is incredibly open and honest, and as a journalist, I completely respect and appreciate that. When I tweeted out that video last week of that, I didn't really think – the only thing that was semi-offensive in that whole clip was that he said it was the great state of Massachusetts when it is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But honestly, I think that was a slip-up by Drinkwitz. I don't think he meant any offense. It was amazing to see how Boston College took that. And, even their head coach was asked about it at his news conference. I was just sitting here like, really? I don't think anything Drinkwitz said was incorrect. He was answering Dave Matter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's question as honestly as he could. I completely agree. I think any rational person would agree that, yeah, it makes more sense to play a regional opponent than travel all the way to Boston College. But it's amazing sometimes how perception is reality, as opposed to, what actually was said. And this is a perfect example of that. And who's to say that that's what turned the tide for Boston College in that game? I don't know. Social media, I always have to remember, it's not a real place, but it was definitely fascinating. And my mentions, leading up to the game and after the game were just out of control. But it did, I guess, make controversy sometimes makes games more fun. And I think for the fans, I think that's probably why they jumped on it, because it just made it a little bit more interesting.
Oh, no doubt. And it makes the prep and the media talk before the game and after the game more interesting as well, which as a media person, I can't really complain about it because it's enjoyable to talk about. I do think it's funny, though, that if they were more mad, not at the disrespect of hey, Boston College is a program that we don't care about playing, but more of the state versus Commonwealth. I think that's hilarious. I had to look up. I know Kentucky's a Commonwealth, so it's Massachusetts, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And I feel like we do this every year. We have a Commonwealth discussion, and I still don't know what the difference is between a state and a Commonwealth. I don't even really care to look it up. It's just funny that if people from Massachusetts honestly take that seriously, I think that's pretty funny.
Yeah, my dad's from Pennsylvania, so I probably should ask him just if he takes offense to it. I'm not sure, but we're from the great state of Missouri here. So,
there it is.
We're from the Show Me State, so I can't. We're tough here.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew Kauffman, thank you very much. Enjoy the visit each and every week with you, and have fun on Saturday at Faurot Field, like you said, getting ready to basically shoot nonstop as Josh Heupel runs a play about every 8 seconds, and we will talk with you next Thursday as well.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. That's Andrew Kauffman, sports director at KMIZ-TV in Columbia, brought to you by International Tap House, iTap. They have the new location, iTap Delmar. It's open, corner of Skinker and Delmar in the CBS building. They got college football and Sunday ticket there. Any iTap location will have Mizzou games on. If they don't, just ask your bartender. They will turn it on for you. They got 5 locations now in Soulard, in Delmar, Columbia, Missouri. That's the one that Andrew Kauffman goes to. Kansas City, the Crossroads location there in KC, and also Louisville, Jim Hewer. Yeah. Jim Hewer, are you a trivia guy? They have trivia, and it's every Wednesday at 7 o'clock at their iTap Delmar location. I don't mind a little trivia.
It can be fun.